Right. Okay. We're live. We're just going to give it just a minute here. Let people kind of jump in. Make sure that everyone is seeing what we're doing here. Give it just another minute before we get going. Thank you guys for checking in early.
Gotta put that Arby's out there.
You know, that deal, 35 for 70 for those roast beef sandwiches. Can't beat it.
No, not at all. It's like when we were growing up, my mom used to have like those little packs of Arby's sauce, like just in the fridge.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, best.
Oh, yeah. Got to put it on everything you can.
Fries, ice cream.
Oh, yeah. Some Arby's sauce, ice cream. I would be down with that. I want to swim a 200 IM in a pool of Arby's sauce. We'll see if Arby's can make that happen.
And just lay in a bunch of bread after.
Yep. I'll use the bread as the towels.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started here. All right, guys. Thank you for jumping in. The point of these is that we're getting as much information out there that's easily accessible for both coaches, athletes, and their parents. So we're having a different guest every day. Today, our guest brought to you by the Arby's Skype hotline is Dan Maggio. Dan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey guys, as Paul said, Dan Maggio. I'm a local physical therapist here in the Phoenix area, specifically North Phoenix and Glendale, Peoria area, as well as surfing the North Valley, so Anthem. Background in sports performance. So I was a strength conditioning coach and trainer before getting into the physical therapy realm. So went to PT school after spending some years getting people better at performance. And so I think that gives me the lens to look at athletics and performance.
Perfect. So, Dan, the topic today is shoulder injury prevention. So let's go ahead. Let's diagnose something here. Let's talk about what the most common shoulder injuries that you're seeing in swimmers is.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, right off the bat, probably most common if you're looking at the shoulder, it's going to be some shoulder overuse, especially we call shoulder impingement. It's a fancy term. All it really means is that there's getting caught in the joint. It can be physical, it can be a sensation. It can be an overuse injury, something on the front side or the back. And impingement is, let's say if there's a rug that gets stuck in the doorway and you're trying to close and open the doorway and maybe there's something that's just getting caught there. So it can be something as simple as like a tendon that's just getting overused. It can be maybe some of the rotator cuff is getting pinched as you're doing that overhead motion. So that seems to be something pretty common in the swimmers of the world that I've seen.
Awesome. So with impingement syndrome, you're looking at multiple different causes and musculature deformities that are leading to it. It's not just one thing, right?
Totally, yeah. So I mean, it's like we talk about shoulder pathologies or anything that's wrong with the shoulder. Impingement is kind of this big umbrella term. I think people just say, "Oh, you've got impingement. Here, go do these 5 different band exercises, and you'll be solid." In some cases, that can work out. A lot of times, you kind of need to be specific about what the tissue is, why it's happening. Is it an overload versus an underload issue? Is it an overuse versus an underuse, right? So trying to figure out what exactly the tissue is and why it's happening. So
that those different causes in that, I mean, all these athletes are pretty much doing the same movement. So those different musculature problems that are leading to an impingement, those would be more indicative of a weaker or stronger muscle, right? Like they may have a stronger trap muscle that's pulling things in a different direction.
Yeah, totally. And I think no athlete is the same and no athlete develops the same, right? So based on how we move as kids and as we develop into our athletic bodies and our young adult bodies, we're going to just develop certain different patterns and ways to move, if you will. And there's no right or wrong way to move. We're just going to complete the task in a way that is just most efficient for the body at that time. So like you said, something like an upper trap pretty tight from maybe just overuse, always working on shoulder elevation, right? Another kid could get shoulder impingement from a lot of pulling motions. Another individual can get the shoulder overuse if they have something going on down the chain. Like we tend to look at just the site of injury and say, "Oh, the culprit must be here," instead of fully breaking out what else is happening in the whole system.
That's really interesting. So, like you're looking up the chain. Like I always, when I'm looking at my athletes and they're complaining bicep tendonitis, I'm usually looking up the chain to see if there's an impingement issue. They have knots in their shoulders, that type of thing, going up that chain. What's that next step backwards from there that you're looking for, particularly around a shoulder injury, like something that would fall under the umbrella of an impingement?
Nice. I'm so glad that you're at least looking at, hey, if you got some bicep stuff, let's trace this back to something on the backside, right, or something going off. Do some soft tissue work. A lot of times we forget that the shoulder blade is a really unique joint. How it sits on the rib cage. It's the only joint in the body that really doesn't have a bone-to-bone interface. Meaning you've got muscle between your shoulder blade and your ribs, and that's super unique because it causes this sliding effect where the shoulder blade can slide up and down that rib cage to create motion. So I think not only as a coach you should be thinking, well, if I've got some overuse at the ball and socket, I should at least then be looking at the shoulder blade. Now, not only does the shoulder blade make a huge difference, but what the shoulder blade is sitting on is ribs that are dynamic, right? So those ribs have a curve to them. Let me see if I can get my hands here. And that shoulder blade is also curved. So if the shoulder blade has a natural curved face to it, I need to have a natural curve of those ribs so it can glide and slide through the water. What we see is with different patterns of how I stabilize my trunk, those ribs will tend to do different things, like maybe pull away from that shoulder blade and giving us different signs of, let's say, scapular instability. And really, it can be a core strength problem, and we're just labeling it as scapular instability or just glenohumeral joint impingement. So that's just even diving deeper into what's going on.
That's super interesting to me because I know I teach a core-centric stroke. Like I want everything connected to the core and driving across that way. So the idea that engagement of the core is not just important for a more efficient stroke, but it's actually going to prevent an injury is a huge deal to me. Like that, I think that's a really good selling point to a kid on why you need to be engaging that core more frequently. Does that kind of mesh with what you're saying here?
Oh, totally, Paul. You hit it on the head. Like, I think we're both familiar with Vern Gambetta and some of his philosophies and his coaching styles. And he's said a lot of things that, as a coach, I've taken with me into the therapy world. Is he has this term of the body moves like it's a serape effect, right? There's kind of a twisting corkscrew pattern. He's also got a lot of cool drills, and you do too, of how the body moves in a figure eight pattern, right? Especially if I'm moving through the water, I need to keep that figure eight in that wave form as tight as possible, and I need to do that through core stability and core strength. My arms and my legs, my kick, is just an extension of what's going on from my rib cage and my pelvis. So I think, like you're saying, instead of worrying about sometimes how your fingers are hitting the water or how fast your feet are moving, let's figure out what's going on from a core standpoint first.
So we're middle out.
Totally, yeah, core to extremity.
Perfect.
Yep.
So, like you mentioned the Serape effect, and I want you to explain that to everybody that's out there because it's such a cool term and it's such a cool phenomenon, and I don't think it definitely doesn't just relate to swimming; it relates to all sports. So it isn't a it as an athlete, it is a critical thing to understand, and I think parents or coaches that are working with their athlete and wanting to help them grow and help them understand more, I think it's a really important deal. So can you explain the Serape effect a little more?
Yeah, it's it takes a little bit of visualization, a little bit of thinking about it. Um, it basically imagine the crack of a whip, right? So you've got all this energy that's stored in a whip. You have to get that energy out. So that whip creates this waveform, and at the very end, that's when all that energy is released, whether it makes contact or whether it makes that sound as it snaps upon itself. So your body, what's super interesting, and we don't appreciate really from just looking at images of muscles, is that your origin to insertion or insertion to origin, those aren't straight lines. Those actually curve and they twist along, let's say, your leg or your shoulder, or even connecting your shoulder to your hip, right? All of this moves, twists, and it just it moves very fluid-like. But I think, as in like you're saying, in all athletic endeavors, especially swimming, where you're moving through a particular medium of water, you need to be able to treat your body like a whip and create power. Um, Versus if you're just moving in straight lines all the time, it's not going to translate as well. So I don't know if I'm doing a good job
No,
describing that. It's wrap.
it was perfect. So it's that whip-like movement where it doesn't, it's not traveling in a straight line. So, like in swimming, I like to think of it as the rotation across your body as you're swimming. So the more simplified way of thinking about it would be like when you're walking, right? So your left arm rises with the right leg. Okay, so you're working across the body, not straight up and down. So it's very similar in swimming. That whip movement that Dan's referring to, that snap of the whip, where all that energy comes from, is this shoulder driving down and the opposite shoulder driving through. So when you think in swimming related terms, when you drive that shoulder down, that front hand has to snap through it like a whip as well. Like that is kind of my interpretation of the Serape effect when it comes to swimming freestyle. But I think it's such a unique thing that Vern talks about and that you and I talk about really frequently that I think is underutilized in the sport.
Totally. I think even it's underutilized in rehab a bunch, right? I mean, not saying anything bad about the profession, but oftentimes we're trained in PT school to just look at the pain, the side of the injury, right? If you treat that, cool, it's only half the battle. And oftentimes it may not even do anything because you're not treating the whole body. Like you're saying, if that Serape effect is really related to gait and how we move on land. So if we take that and go into the water, I should be able to cross connect my opposite hip to my opposite shoulder, vice versa, to shift load from one stance phase to the other. And then doing that in the water is just going to make you a better athlete.
No, that's awesome. Okay, so we've really covered quite a bit here. So I'll recap real quick before we move on. So common shoulder injury is that impingement syndrome, just an overuse injury, and it's an umbrella term for what could be a lot of different problems. But it's running it up the chain to figure out what the cause of that problem is, and then starting to treat it. Um, so we've talked a lot about the core connection and how having a strong core can help prevent that shoulder injury because it's going to keep the core shape more engaged and allow that scapula to move more freely across your rib cage. So Dan, why don't you take us through kind of evaluating how to treat an impingement syndrome and then the rehab that comes with it?
Okay. Yeah, so depending on the athlete that you have, right? Usually what I'm going to do is a head-to-toe assessment. That's going to look at full body flexion, extension, so bending, extending, rotation as well, since we need full body rotation. We're looking at that with the shoulders and without the shoulders. So we're looking, can the spine fully get left and right while it twists? And can you do that in an active environment versus a passive environment? Passive versus active is saying what your muscles can control actively against gravity, versus passively, what can I, as an external influence, due to the body, can the joint get into the right positioning, absorb and adapt to stress? Right. So this may look at, let's say, getting the shoulders all the way overhead. Right. So I should be able to clear my ear with my biceps. I should be able to get this full flexion pattern without a whole lot of back up the weight, without a whole lot of hyperextension and my low back. Right. So I'm not sure if we can tell from that pattern, but maybe if an athlete is just lacking full overhead motion, that they're going to cause some overuse at this point, because now I've got to compensate somewhere in my shoulder or even down the chain to get that full reach that you're looking for in sport. So part of this is breaking out full global body movements, and then the other half is looking at what joints in specific are limiting those full body movements. Let's say, like you're saying, getting the arms all the way overhead, or can the athlete reach across the body without pain, or getting something on the front side or something on the back, maybe to address the tissues that are caused there, or maybe it's a joint restriction or capsular restriction. Maybe it's something going on with the nerves that are flowing through the area. So definitely depends on what's going on. A big screen that all parents and coaches can do right now is saying, okay, can those kids, while standing, actively get full shoulder flexion while keeping their rib cage down? Right? We're looking for this area not to flare open as I reach this arm head. If I get a lot of this torso flaring, it'll get compensated somewhere, right? So that would probably be one of the first things that I would do if I'm just intervening quick, going out to the deck, just seeing what's going on. From there, probably the simplest thing is being able to unroll some of the soft tissue that gets overused. What we're talking about here is that powerful pec that we pull down and across our body to move water, as well as our lats, right? You see a bunch of those swimmers with big, thick backs, long, lanky arms. Those lats get pretty developed and sometimes stiff over time. Using a soft tissue implement, let's say a foam roller, let's say a tennis ball or a lacrosse ball in some of these areas, can do a lot of benefit to loosening up a muscle that does a really good job of doing a certain movement over a long period of time. So I'd probably spend some time showing that some love, getting in there with the ball, as well as getting into some of this area through that lat, just to loosen it up to see if maybe that ball and socket loosens up. That, again, is just addressing the joint aspects. So now let's go a little bit farther down the chain, like you were saying. If an athlete can't control their rib cage flare, and I'm just moving from this piece all the time when I swim, maybe I need to do some more ground-based core work, or jumping into something like heavier weights, or doing other things with bands for the shoulders. So can that athlete prioritize maybe something like a dead bug, laying on the ground, moving the arms and legs in opposite patterns, making sure their core is in a good position? Does that help with some of the...
No, that's awesome, and I think it's interesting. I think when I look at movements here and keeping that chest down, what I'm looking at is mobility versus range of motion. And I always have my different terminologies for where I consider range of motion is where I can get to, mobility is where I can get to and still have enough power to put force into a movement. And it's like, in my opinion, the larger percentage of injuries comes when you go outside your mobility. So it's almost I guess there's the two large components to it. There's the injuries that happen because of lack of range of motion, and the injuries that happen because of the too great of a range of motion. You aren't actually mobile there, and that's always been kind of my struggle with impingement is how do you assess that? Like what direction? Like it takes a coach really taking the initiative and doing an assessment immediately as soon as interacting with the swimmer to evaluate, okay, where is the swimmer weak? Are they going to have more problems because they're hypermobile or because they don't have the range of motion? Is that
That's an awesome point. I mean, saying you hit it on the head. Like if I've got, let's say the shoulder joint's got only this much range of motion, right? So that's probably pretty narrow for a swimmer if I've got to get full excursion of that joint to get in the water, out of the water. But imagine if I've got a kid who's walking in and their range of motion is looking like this. Let's just say that's their arc of motion for their shoulder. Right? They can get all the way from this piece to this piece. That's probably huge, right?
Yeah.
Versus someone in like that. So yeah, you're totally right. There's different demands on range of motion versus like what the joint can actually do versus mobility, what you can actively control with that. And sometimes in PT world, we call that mobility versus stability. You hit on the head there with what the kid has access to using versus what's just there inherently.
okay?
So,
Perfect.
yeah.
So, like, what are like we've talked about? To recap again before we move on, we've talked about what the most common injuries are, how many different causes there are to it, and then we've talked about how best to treat it. You know, a lot of foam rolling, a lot of soft tissue work, foam rollers, lacrosse balls, tennis balls, just getting something in there to loosen things up, and then running up the chain to find some mobility and stability issues. What are some preventative things that are safe for these athletes to be doing at home? I mean, right now, no one's swimming. We have plenty of time to go and relearn these movements. What are some activating things that they can do at home to make sure that we're not going to jump back in the water at the end of the month and hurt ourselves?
Totally. So a lot of times when I look at treatments, I look at it in a way of what's your first aid process because you've got an injury, right? So then you're breaking your treatments into first aid. Then I've got something that maybe is a reset, and then maybe something that's like a reload, right? So how do I get more load to the tissue? So if I'm only addressing the first aid process, which that's going to look like foam rolling, soft tissue work, getting a tennis ball into my muscle, then I've got another two pieces that I'm forgetting about, right? So oftentimes we bring just the world of tool work to the situation when really they're maybe missing the other two. That's the reset and then the reload. So some of these patterns, let's see if I can demonstrate some on the ground. We're looking at how do we centrate that joint in that shoulder blade as it moves. Centration is just saying if I have a ball and socket that might look like a paper plate and I have to hold a golf ball on that paper plate, how do I make it more stable, right? How do I make the roll to hold that golf ball as it's moving around? Some of my favorite things to do. Let's say I'm in this bear position. So my hands are going to be right underneath my shoulders and my knees are going to be underneath my hips. From this position, I'm just going to lift my knees off the ground, keep my abs tight, and I tap my opposite shoulder and then reach out to a Y, or reach out above my head for a T. So I'll do it from this side, that way you guys can see it all around mine. So again, super awesome movement here. Hands going to be right underneath the shoulders, under the hips, finding the ground with my toes. I'm going to lift my knees from the ground, and then I'm going to tap my shoulder, reach out, I can tap, reach to a T, a Y, out to the side, back down. It just alternates here, right? So I'm getting stability of the shoulder that's down, and then mobility on the one that's moving. Another great assessment and treatment tool I use a lot with athletes, especially this can turn into exercise, is saying a down dog push-up position. So if I'm in, I'll do it from the front and then from the side. So if I'm in this tall push-up plank, I want to be able to push my hips to the ceiling and look at can my ears get to my shoulders as I push my hips up. I'll push aside. So if I'm here, pushing the hips up this way, and my hands stay on the ground as the shoulder blade moves around my rib cage and my hips go up to the ceiling. That's looking at a closed chain position, hands on the ground to see if I have adequate stability in my core and in my shoulder blade as well as this joint.
I love that. That's totally connecting to everything core centric and then outward moving. That's a perfect exercise to be doing. Like I've always done a lot of isometric work, hand against the wall, press, and hold that position and make sure you're engaged at every range of motion that you have. But I like that so much more, where you're actually engaging multiple muscle groups. You're engaging that body and teaching a lot more body awareness. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, closed chain positions is really good for the shoulder, and a lot of times you hear that in the rehab world. All that closed chain means is if I have my hand on a pull-up bar and I pull myself up, it's a little bit different than if I have my hand on a dumbbell and I push up and down, because there's nothing connecting my hand over to the space. It's now closed, so its shoulder blade is moving on the rib cage. Would be if I'm dumbbell pressing overhead. But let's say that I'm pulling my body up. I have to move my rib cage then on my shoulder blade. So it's just flipping the origin insertion and the muscle action. Right? So if a biceps, let's say here's a biceps, it can do this. But let's say my hand is fixed, it's going to do that to the rest of my body. Right? So it's just flipping around the context of how the muscle is actually going to be used.
So it's essentially teaching your core how to move efficiently against the shoulder.
Totally. Yeah.
And that's exactly what we need out of swimming to prevent an impingement problem. So that is an ideal exercise. So having those closed chain movements is a much better solution than even a dumbbell press, which is really like an interesting topic for me.
what are your thoughts on dumbbell pressing for swimmers?
I've always based it kind of off Vern, and Vern has always pushed the insertion from shoulder blade moving against rib cage. So it's a lot of pressing. It's a lot more pressing than it is the more closed chain movements. But not that there weren't closed chain movements involved, but it was more dumbbell work than anything else. So I really like that. I think that it's a unique approach that I think it gives coaches another tool in their toolbox, because I think the dumbbell press works great for a lot of athletes, but for the ones where it's not, for the ones that are having the impingement issues, I think this presents a much better recourse for reaching that athlete.
Yeah, totally. And Vern's a smart guy. He trains a lot of high-level athletes. I think just knowing the training equals rehab continuum, there's going to be a time and place for dumbbell press and a time and place for push-up, right? And I think it's the job to talk between the coaching staff, performance staff, and rehab staff of where's this athlete at and what can we do to work around whatever issue they have, right? Because dumbbell press, I give that to my athletes all the time, right? Especially people who need to figure out how to reach that shoulder blade overhead. A lot of times in life, we don't do that. We're sitting here, right? If we're reaching overhead, it's in this position. It's not in this position, which we need. So dumbbell press is a great exercise to teach that shoulder blade to do what it needs to. But if you're doing that too much in practice, and maybe you dial it back and do some different movements instead.
No, I think it's a great tool. I like how it plays against each other and works the same. Ultimately, it works the same goal, but it achieves it by doing both. It achieves it in a way where you're doing a better job preventing injury while getting stronger. So I love that.
Yeah, no, I couldn't say it better. That's trying to prevent injury while getting stronger is the goal of hopefully a lot of rehab and training. Sometimes I think as coaches we can kind of get overboard and we can say, push as hard as you can on land. And it's supposed to translate over to the water. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but that should be the goal. Look for ultimate carryover.
Yeah, well said. Cool. I'll recap real quick on everything, and then we'll get Dan's contact info and where you can reach him. But basically, we just assessed, okay, the most common shoulder injuries for swimmers is that impingement syndrome, which can cover a wide variety of issues, but they're all related to the movement of the shoulder. So tracing that back down to what the real issue is. We talked about the core connection and how starting center and working out to the extremities will help prevent injuries long term. And we talked about some movements, some closed chain movements that are going to teach your core and your body how to move around the shoulder blade. Whereas a lot of the open chain movements, the dumbbell press, any sort of press, is just teaching the shoulder blade how to move and how in equilibrium those work together much better towards preventing injuries and creating a stronger athlete. Is that about right?
That's perfect. Yeah, that was it.
All right, Dan, why don't you go ahead and tell everyone where they can reach you, where they can get some more information, and if any of these athletes have some shoulder or any hip issues, how they can reach out to you.
Yeah, probably the easiest bet right now is either my email or Instagram. And on Instagram, I have everything basically streamlined on there. So it's at Dr. Dan Maggio. So it's all spelled out one phrase. It's DrDanMaggio. Putting up some content on there, so hopefully I'll get some more of these exercises posted for you guys. Email's also linked up there as well as phone number. So if you guys have questions, feel free to reach out either by email, direct message, or send me a text.
Perfect. And tell them real quick what you're doing, what you're in the process of doing on that Instagram, what content you're putting out right now.
Yeah, right now we're doing a 30-day challenge for the month of April. And every 7 days or every week, we're going to be doing different parts of the body, right? So right now we're on day 6, we're going to the core, right? So it's a great time for you swimmers and parents to look at what core deficits does my athlete have and how can we work on it. Over the next couple of weeks, we'll be looking at different full body movement patterns and what you should be able to do as a human, and then translating that into performance. So we're going to be covering the squat, probably the hinge, as well as probably some sprinting, which looks at that serape effect, that running and gait pattern, which translates really well into the water. So we'll be doing a lot of different things right now through April, still doing that 30-day challenge. But if you guys have questions or different videos, ask and we'll get them up.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Dan, for jumping on today.
Thanks, Coach Paul. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.